Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Codependency podcast. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Susan Peirce Thompson. Dr. Thompson is the New York Times bestselling author of Bright Line Eating, the official Bright Line Eating cookbook, and Resume. She is an adjunct associate professor of brain and cognitive sciences at the University of Rochester and an expert in the psychology of eating. She is the president of the Institute for Sustainable Weight Loss and the founder of Bright Line Eating, a worldwide movement on a mission to help 1 million people have their bright transformations. The full physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional transformation that accompanies healthy, sustainable weight loss by 2030. Susan, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Marissa. It's great to be here with you.
Okay, so let's start with the typical two. First and foremost, I'm curious, Susan, how do you conceptualize the term codependency?
So I think of codependency as when someone's doing for someone else what they could and should do for themselves. And often I think they're doing that to get love and approval, to feel safe and secure in themselves, that they're valued, that they're appreciated, that they're needed. I think of a care. I think in internal family systems language when it comes to the human psyche. So I think each of us have parts of ourselves that are either wounded or they're trying to protect us from being wounded, right? And the caretaker part, which is the codependent part, the caretaker part tries to get ahead of any future wounding, tries to keep us from being hurt by doing for others. And that's a strategy to feel like we're more likely to be loved, accepted, approved of, to stay in someone's good graces, right? And yeah, those are kind of some of the ways that I think of codependency. I also often think of codependency as in relationship to the addict, right? So an addict tends to create a lot of codependence around them as they get deeper and deeper into their disease.
And right, we've definitely talked about parts work and IFS on the podcast before. I'm curious, in your observations, like those who tend to navigate life with this caregiver part, does it often keep them from being hurt?
Well, not necessarily. Well, first of all, no one in life is kept from being hurt. So let's all be clear. Life is painful at times. So there is no way to not be hurt. But also, parts of us are not our highest, best, authentic self, right? So they're often operating from outdated schemas, from conceptions of the world that aren't as wise and mature as we could be if we were living from our calm, clear, curious, compassionate, connected, confident, courageous, authentic self, right?
Right.
And so, no, they don't help us from being hurt. And as a matter of fact, they can often, these caretaker parts, these codependent parts can often breed resentment, or over dependence. And in fact, the caretaker, the person who's operating from that part is often not taking care of themselves adequately. And so they end up hurt because they're dropping the ball on the self-care that is needed, like the whole, it's so cliche, right? But put your oxygen mask on first. And so because their tank isn't full, they're actually not giving from the extra. They're giving from a depleted state, right? And so not always, but often. So yeah, no, it causes other problems.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're going to get into self-care and ways we do or don't take care of ourselves. But before that, I'm curious, Susan, do you have a codependent experience or relationship from your own life that you can share with us?
Yeah, I wish I had asked for her permission. I won't go into too much detail because I didn't check for permission, but I believe she has, I'm trying to think back. I'm pretty sure she has given me permission to talk about her recovery journey. So my mom is a codependent. I'm an addict, and my mom is a codependent, and she's, gotten help for that. And I mean, even before my addictions really took off, I started using drugs when I was 14. And I think my addiction escalated her codependence, but she was really codependent with me well before that. I mean, I remember as a young kid, I remember a real feeling of powerfulness in myself, and learning that I had more than my fair share of the sway in the household. And we were poor. My parents got divorced when I was 4, and I lived in San Francisco with my mom 4 nights a week and my dad 3 nights a week. And when I was at my mom's house, we were, well, at my dad's house too. My dad was a cab driver. We didn't have much money. We were living kind of right at the poverty line, and we were on a budget, and we budgeted for 2 pretty modest restaurant meals a month. Me and my mom. And the idea was that she would choose one and I would choose one. But whenever it was her turn to choose one, I didn't want to go where she wanted to eat. She wanted to eat Indian food, Thai food. I was like, I wanted pizza. I wanted, I wanted to go somewhere familiar, somewhere that I loved.
Right.
And, 2 restaurant meals a month didn't feel like nearly enough to me. And when it was her turn, I would throw a fit. I would have a temper tantrum until almost always she would capitulate and eat where I wanted to eat that night. I remember once sitting miserably at an Indian restaurant with her and making it very clear to her that this was not okay and not fun. And, and this did not work for me at all. And I don't know that she ever did that again. I think that I always got the restaurant I wanted on my night. And so a lot of what I remember as a kid was, I mean, my mom and I had a beautiful relationship in a lot of ways. She was a very present, very loving, wonderful mom. And we have a terrific relationship today. I'm in recovery. She's in recovery. And, our relationship is great. But back then, whenever there was conflict, my strategy became to push and push and push and create as much discord as possible, because I knew she would give in, and she kind of trained me that way. Right. She was so uncomfortable with disharmony and with me being upset with her, or in general, that it really worked to cause a big stink. And so her lack of ability to have a clear boundary that she wouldn't deviate from, brought out the worst in me, and certainly didn't help in my upbringing. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing about that. And I think sometimes listeners, I sense, pathologize themselves and think that they're these weak, pathetic doormats. And at the same time, I think you highlight how it often is a dance between two people, right? And we're not the only, you know, it's part of a dynamic. And so yeah, so I appreciate you highlighting that because yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean it's all your fault or all your mom's, but at the same time, like it's looking at our part in relationships and not thinking that we're the broken cause.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
very much. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's shift to your specialties. So I'm curious, Susan, more broadly, how do you sense codependency relates to our weight?
Yeah, that's a great question. It relates in all kinds of ways, Marissa. So, uh, I can think of two main ways. One is, I'll call it the addiction pathway, and the other is the consolation prize pathway, or the maybe the firefighter pathway, the yeah, in IFS terms. So let's do that second one first. So the consolation pathway, the firefighter pathway, basically goes like this. We don't stand up for ourselves. We play the doormat again. We don't set a boundary that needs to be set. We don't know what to do because this person is not behaving in a way that's okay, and we're at our wits' end, and we find ourselves in old patterns. And food is there as a reliable comfort, right? Food is there as the consolation prize. Food is there to help soothe us from the hurt that we've got, right? The part of us that doesn't know what to do about the pain that we're in can at least eat over it. And the food indulger part of us comes up and says, well, that was awful and terrible, but a big bowl of pasta will help, or a pint of ice cream will help, or, at the very least, we don't have to cook dinner tonight. We can order a pizza. And or grab a bag of, a box of, whatever, and just sit down and watch Netflix tonight. Just comfort yourself, right? Food is comfort, food is solace, food is emotional numbing, and also emotional soothing.
Right.
And so I think carrying excess weight can happen that way, right? For those of us who have a lot of challenging relationships, or frustrations, or unacknowledged emotions, right? If we don't have the skills to navigate our relationships in a healthy, courageous, clear way, food can be a way that we cope with that reality, and frankly drug ourselves a little bit, like numb ourselves out to the reality of the relationship situation that we're seeing. So that's one major way that our weight relates to codependency, right? But the other big pathway, I'm guessing a lot of your listeners may not have realized, which is the addiction pathway itself. So food addiction is a real thing. Food addiction is both a substance addiction, with an addiction to the ultra processed foods in our food environment, and to excess quantities of really any food. And it's also a behavioral addiction, the addiction to just eating in and of itself, the pure chewing and bending the elbow, and the sensory experience of eating is very addictive. And oftentimes codependents have addicts in their life, maybe in their family tree, and addiction is genetic, profoundly and powerfully so. And codependents may have identified other people in their family, their mother, their father, their brother, their sister, their spouse, their, fill in the blank, their grandparents, all these other people as being addicts, alcoholics, addicts, smokers, etc. And by sheer force of maybe responsibility or social acceptability or whatever, someone with those genes can develop a food addiction and a weight problem and never identify that they're actually an addict too, that they're just eating over it while their mother, father, sister, brother is drinking and drugging and smoking over it. And we're just as addicted as they are. We're just using a more socially acceptable drug called food. And so I see a lot of people drugging their way through challenging life relationships in the family and using food and not really waking up to the fact that they're just as much an addict as those addicts are. Not waking up to that reality until they're quite a bit older in life. And it's a rude awakening for them when they see it. Like, oh, look at how I'm using food and how I'm trying to get this weight off and dieting, and my failed attempts and repeated relapses with my food actually just looks exactly like they're drinking. It's just in a more socially acceptable format.
Right. So more socially acceptable. And right, I'm like stuck on the potentially because they have a greater sense of responsibility. They choose, right, likely unconsciously, they choose a substance that won't necessarily interfere as much with the responsibilities that they have.
That in some ways allows them to have more control, not less control. I mean, like, while I was still, so can I share a bit about my story here as an addict? So I was addicted to drugs at the age of 14, and I went through the most vicious 6 years of drug use. I mean, just picture the real deal, right? Like, I started light with, mushrooms, acid, ecstasy, pot, and alcohol at the age of 14. I started all those drugs, but then very quickly found crystal methamphetamine. So meth, speed, ice, whatever you want to call it. And then had drug-induced psychosis, dropped out of high school, found cocaine, started freebasing cocaine, then graduated to smoking crack cocaine, funded it all through prostitution. And so at the age of 19, I was a high school dropout, a crack addict, and a prostitute. And that was my resume. And I got clean and sober when I was 20. But then my addiction jumped right to food, and I put on a ton of weight very fast. And by my mid-20s was living with obesity. And while I was an active food addict, I enrolled in community college and got straight A's, transferred to UC Berkeley and got straight A's, spoke at the graduation, got into every PhD program I applied to, chose the best one in the world at the time in my field, got a master's and a PhD in brain and cognitive sciences, moved to Sydney, Australia, and did a 2-year postdoc in psychology. All of that professional accomplishment fueled by food and caffeine, sugar, caffeine, flour, fat, like sugar, flour, fat, caffeine, sugar, flour, fat, caffeine, fueling my professional accomplishments with food. So in some ways, the food can help you. You're right. It's like, if someone doesn't want to lose control, if someone wants to have a more manageable life. Now, food addiction can make your life very unmanageable, but it can also help you keep it together. And I know a lot of really effective, successful professional people fuel their success with sugar and flour and caffeine. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, yeah, potentially, right, we're not saying it's causation, but there might be a correlation between codependency and substances, right, like food, that help them maintain their codependent patterns, right? They don't have to become an irresponsible,
right,
neglectful partner, because
Right.
that's what their identity is
Or
built
human.
on.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So we're talking about codependency and weight in general. I'm curious more specifically your thoughts on how codependency can impact weight loss or weight gain.
Well, I know with bright line eating, which is a weight loss pathway, right? Um, People have to learn how to practice self-care. And if they're too engaged in a codependent life where they've said yes to all kinds of things, they've got obligations for all these people, they're caring for this one and helping that one and on this volunteer board and showing up for this and showing up for that. They've said yes to all these things and implicitly said no to themselves. They don't have time to go to the grocery store to get actual real food and do some food prep and, cook themselves a real meal. They don't have time to engage with a support community that would be supporting them in their weight loss journey, right? They've got to reevaluate their priorities and their time allotments and heal a little bit from that codependency in order to succeed with their weight loss journey. And we see it all the time, and we help people do that. And honestly, I love these folks. They come into our community and they're so kind and giving and wonderful. And Bright Line Eating helps them to not just lose their excess weight and keep it off, but find the balance where they're still incredibly giving people. They're just giving from a full cup. They know how to source their own nurturance first, how to hit the sweet spot where they're getting their needs met first thing in the morning with a meditation session, a reading of a beautiful daily reader book, maybe some prayer if that's their flavor, and getting support from the Bright Line Eating community, giving support in the Bright Line Eating community, making their healthy breakfast and eating it. And now it's barely 7 a.m. and they're filled up and ready to give to people from a place of real self fullness, wholeness. And it's a beautiful thing. And they lose their weight and they keep it off and they become way better people. And I think on the outside, others may or may not even notice. Maybe they do, that, oh, you seem happier. You seem sparklier. You seem, more relaxed. Right. And the giving comes from not a place of need or expectation, but just really an unconditional give from someone who's got enough to give. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I want to talk about addiction, but before that, you are making me think, Susan. So at points in my past, when I was at my most, you could say like my codependent depth.
Yeah.
For me, I definitely, I would say like I had disordered eating, off and on throughout my life. And I found myself at times in this, I don't know how to say it, like codependent, like conundrum or quandary, where my body was one way that I met people's expectations, right? That I sought approval and love. And so here I was, right, being very dependent on people's perception of me and my body, wanting to please that. But then I also coped with my codependency a lot with food, right? You're talking about the consolation prize. So like I'm like, oh my God, yes. And yeah, I'm curious like your thoughts on that space where yeah, potentially this podcast is focused on young women and so their body image, right, being impacted by the way that they're coping most with their codependency, that then right, at times, like when I was heavier, it was the worst for me, right? Because of what my body meant to other people approving of it. Your thoughts as I say that?
Yeah, got it. I mean, I think kind of the question underneath your question is, why lose weight or maintain a certain body, right? We want to
Mm,
think about the health at any size movement,
yeah.
that kind of thing. And I think it can be hard for someone to know what their motives are in our current society for maintaining a certain size or losing weight or being a certain size. I mean, in bright line eating, we talk about a bright body. Um, we talk about weight loss a little bit, but mostly we talk about a bright body. A bright body is one that is in alignment, right? When you're doing bright line eating and you're bright, it means that you're eating uh abundant, healthy, delicious meals that have the right amount of food for your body. And it means that you're free in your mind. You're not thinking about what you've eaten or not eaten, whether you're on your plan or off your plan, if you've exercised or not today, blah, 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 how many miles, how many calories, how many pounds. You're not thinking about any of that. You're totally freed up to be focused on your life.
Mm,
And you're eating and is in a real sweet zone of self-actualization where you're caring for yourself with your meals,
right.
prioritizing them, because that not everybody is like this, but the people who come to bright line eating often find that food is their keystone habit, that if their food is dialed in, they feel right with their world, with themselves. It's getting the food right is where the good night's sleep flows from. It's where, the desire to get to the gym flows from. It's where everything flows from. If their food is off, no matter how sunny the day, they feel like something's wrong in their world. Whereas if their food is dialed in, the world could be falling apart around them and they feel like it's okay. I know how to handle this. I've had my healthy breakfast. I've got my lunch packed with me, and we'll go face this catastrophe together, poised, calm, and on point. We've got this, right? And it's like food is the keystone habit. And so when I was living just above the obesity line on the BMI chart, what was it that I was trying to be thin to meet some sort of societal cosmopolitan Vogue magazine expectation? I don't think so.
Mm,
I think I knew that those pounds were a reflection of my food and my relationship with myself somehow being off.
right.
I knew how I was eating, and I was eating compulsively, addictively, reflexively, bad habitly, numbing, using food as a drug. I knew I was doing it. And I had experienced days and weeks where I'd been eating well and nourishing myself with good food. And I wanted that back as much as I wanted a body of a certain size or whatever. And I knew that if I could eat in alignment with my values and my desire to care for myself one day at a time with food, over time, my body would settle out into a size that would feel better, frankly, than the obesity I was living with. Right. So I encourage people to stay focused on that. Another way to look at it is, what do you want to be able to do in your body, right? It's more like a goal body. It's like, I want to be able to do a pull-up. I still can't, nowhere close, but I want to be able to do a pull-up. I like being able to get down on the floor and get up again with ease. I like being able to walk upstairs without pain in my knees. Um, I like to be able to go for a jog and have breath in my lungs that feels really free flowing and healthy. There's things I like to be able to do in my body. Yoga poses I like to be able to do. I like to be limber enough to do certain yoga poses with ease.
Right.
So those are sort of goal body concepts. But I agree that for someone with codependency, staying slender or being thin or whatever can be something that we're doing for others. But I know for myself, um, my bright body is a part of, and the size of my body is a part of what, um, is a part of how I take care of myself. It's not all for others. As a matter of fact,
Right.
really, the parts of it that matter are not for others.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it just sounds like you're able to at least help people like try and find that like intrinsic motivation, because obviously the external didn't work. I was still coping with food and then just at war internally.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, like the food that you eat like is reflective of your relationship with yourself and like caring for yourself. And so really getting in touch with that.
Yeah. And some people find that through an intuitive eating approach, like real permission to eat when your body is hungry and stop eating when your body is full, and to love yourself unconditionally, no matter what your size. And I'll just say for myself, I went pretty far down the intuitive eating path and gave it more than the college try, like hired one of the country's leading experts in it as a coach and surrendered myself utterly to that path. And what I found was that I've done it actually more than once. I can remember two very distinct attempts over a decade apart, once in my 20s and once in my late 30s, where I tried that approach very wholeheartedly. In my 20s, I did it. I was experiencing pretty profound binge eating disorder. And what I found was that when I focused on loving myself and my body as it was, exactly as it was, the binging stopped. Um, and there had to be a lot of permission to eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted it, really, to allow the binging to stop. And I did love myself fundamentally. I had pretty high self-esteem at that point. I was already clean and sober and working the 12 steps for a long time at that point. And you might think all was well, but I was gaining 5 pounds a month that way. And I was enjoying the peace from binging and the self-love, but 30 pounds later on that path with no end in sight of gaining 5 pounds a month in my 20s, and now I'm obese, right? Now I was struggling to tie my shoes. And so I was wearing slip-on shoes. I had to get, the reality was it felt like there was kind of a ceasefire in a war that's still raging. It's like, this actually isn't working. I can't gain 5 pounds a month indefinitely and like just keep going like this, like now I'm class 1 obesity. Am I going to wait for class 2 obesity? I haven't even had kids yet. And the minute I tried to put any control around my food, I was back to binging. So I was in a really tough spot that time. The time I did it in my late 30s, I was already thin. I had already discovered, the ways of eating no sugar and flour that I teach people now. And I just thought I could keep all that and go to a more eat whatever, whenever intuitive eating style approach, more permission around food. At that point, I'd had 3 daughters and I didn't want to transfer food issues to them. So I didn't want them to see me, not eating certain foods or whatever. So I was trying to eat all foods in moderation, and it didn't work. Like, it flat out didn't work. I started to reincorporate some sugar into my life, and it drove me crazy very, very fast, very, very fast. And I realized I really do have an addictive brain, and sugar and I really don't get along. And it is just like, I guess some of your listeners probably need to put boundaries around certain people, or behaviors, right? I need to put certain boundaries around sugar and flour. I really do. Or it becomes a very destructive relationship very, very quickly. And so I just want to say, I think most of us in our society today have a part of us that really holds a listen to your body, intuitive eating style approach as the alpha and the omega. Like, that is the only way to be healthy with your eating, is to be moderate, to eat all foods in moderation, to love your body, love yourself, and eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. And I just want to say, now that I've gotten my PhD and teach this stuff for a living, and, have written the books on it and so forth, not every person's brain can do that. in
Right.
our current food environment, the foods that we have in our society circulating around everywhere are so incredibly addictive for some people that that is actually not, that's like, um interact with everyone with love and an open door policy, right? And it's like, well, no, some of us cannot have an open door policy to every
Yeah.
human being walking planet Earth. Actually, locking and bolting the door to some people is the right thing to do, and saying, I'm blocking your cell phone number now, and blocking you on Facebook too, right? That is actually the right thing to do. I'll just say one more sentence and then I'll stop on this theme. But like, moderation is an interesting concept in and of itself. I love the saying moderation in all things, including moderation, right?
Mm,
Like, to even
right.
understand what moderation means, you have to look at the two entities involved, right? The moderate amount of cyanide for a human being is none.
Mhm. Right.
That's what moderation looks like when it comes to
Right.
arsenic, cyanide, and mercury. It's none. And so, you know, um, it's an interesting topic you raise, and I'm a big fan of loving ourselves. And also, there's some nuance involved in what that might
Yes.
look like for individual people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I embraced intuitive eating for an entire year and really found a lot of peace. And yeah, it definitely encouraged self love, right? Permission. And genetically, I am predisposed for high cholesterol. And
Mm,
that year, my physical, my jaw dropped. There was a huge jump, and part of it was I'd given myself a lot of permission with dairy and processed foods and different kinds of meat. And like once, yeah, I was like, oh, okay, this isn't the answer. Yeah, it was being a little more nuanced with intuitive eating, right? Trying to give myself permission, but yeah, also putting blocks up because that was not sustainable. It was not
not sustainable.
sustainable.
No, not
Mm-mm.
healthy, not
Yeah.
sustainable. And like, some of us really do we want to have it all. We want to have peace with our food, and we want good blood work numbers, and we don't want to find a solution that sacrifices one for the other.
No. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've already started to talk about addiction, food addiction. Any other thoughts on how food addiction connects with other forms of addiction, including codependency?
Yeah. Um, Cross addiction is a thing. So someone who has addiction in their genes is vulnerable to all addictions, including codependency or relationship addiction. Um, and the dopamine downregulation in the mesolimbic reward pathway, the addiction centers in the brain, that is the hallmark of addiction, is a real thing. And those dopamine receptors, they'll take a flood of dopamine from anywhere, whether it's an old abusive boyfriend texting us, or a pint of ice cream, or a cigarette, or a pot of coffee, or, whatever. Like, they'll take it from
Yeah.
wherever. A good, slice of porn, like, whatever, right? And so we do need to be careful as we recover that we're not looking for a hit elsewhere, right?
Right.
It's a real thing. It's a real thing. And so this is part of why alcohol is not on the Bright Line Eating program. Like, not only is it that, well, alcohol is really sugar, and oh, by the way, with that ethanol molecule on there, that's gonna make it all the harder to make good decisions after that. But also, you know, we treat people in Bright Line Eating, or we support people who have a more addictable brain. And, is alcohol really what you want to be putting in your system right when you're not putting sugar and flour into your system? Because, even if you didn't have a problem with alcohol before, you're a sitting duck for it now that you're not
Right.
eating those Twinkies anymore. So, or
Right.
whatever, the pizza, chips,
Mhm.
whatever, chocolate. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm. Okay. And what are the initial steps someone can take to start to disconnect and separate the connection between codependency and their weight?
Yeah, I think the first step is really to take a little quiz. It's at foodfreedomquiz.com, foodfreedomquiz.com. And it's the quiz that gives you an idea of where your roadmap for food freedom might lie. So it's a very short quiz. It's 5 questions. It might even take you like 1 or 2 minutes to do, super short. And what it'll do is it'll tell you how susceptible your brain is to the pull of addictive foods. Are you susceptible to food addiction? And it gives you a score from 1 to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4 being really low scores, 5, 6 being moderate scores, and then like 7, 8, 9, 10 being high scores. And if you score high on that quiz, what it means is that you have a brain that's more prone to food addiction than most, in like the upper third of the population. And what that means is that you're going to need a more structured approach to eating. Things like a bright line approach where you're not eating sugar at all as opposed to trying to eat it in moderation might be really helpful for you. Boundaries around your mealtime. So you're not trying to eat meals and snacks all day long, but actually having 3 square meals a day, that kind of thing. And if you're really high on that scale and your weight is a concern, whether it's because you're carrying extra weight or not enough weight, or you're just obsessed with your weight, because we get people like that too. They're in an ideal body size for them, but they're maintaining it by running 10 miles and obsessing about the cup of non-fat frozen yogurt they're going to allow themselves after that 10-mile run, right? That's their day.
Yeah.
If that's you, right, then really taking on a program that will deliver real food freedom is probably what you want to be looking into. Something like bright line eating. We like to serve people who are, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s on that scale. And we do deliver weight loss and food freedom at the same time. I mean, our numbers are outrageous. We've published a lot of studies now, and people lose as much weight as fast as they do on semaglutide drugs without the big expense, without the shots, without the side effects. Way more weight than any published results from any other weight loss program. I mean, really fast, sustained weight loss. And we have 2-year published data showing no weight regain over 2 years. And then we're working on a 6-year follow-up study right now. Actually, we're collecting the data for a 6-year follow-up study. We also have data showing that we help people post-menopause or post-menopause lose weight as fast and easily as people in their 20s, which is remarkable. And that you might say, well, that's not possible, because everyone knows it's harder to lose weight, when you're 60 than it is when you're 20. But the reason that it's harder is that estrogen has dropped. Estrogens, that's a class of hormone, right? It's not just one hormone. So estrogens drop a lot. And estrogen facilitates the effectiveness of insulin, and insulin is a fat storage and fat release hormone. And that's essentially what's harder about weight loss after menopause, especially belly fat, where the insulin system is especially sensitive. But what happens is, if you're not eating ultra processed foods and you're not jerking around your blood sugar with them, the sensitivity of your insulin is less of a factor. And so the bright line eating approach takes that out of the playing field and sort of levels the playing field for people who are older. So anyway, we've got a lot of amazing published studies also showing that the quote unquote side effects of bright line eating are more happiness, less depression, more feelings of being loved, supported, and connected in the world, less loneliness, more energy, fewer days of depressed mood, like amazing side effects. Like people just feel amazing doing bright line eating. So
what are some of the personal rituals that you help people incorporate, and how does that obviously help them with their weight, but also potentially, right? Personal rituals is very foreign to codependence. So what are those that you help people incorporate?
It's a very big part of the program, actually. So we help them establish their food rituals first.
Okay.
Because you need to layer in new habits. You can't just change everything at the same time. So we help people establish their food rituals. And then we start talking about morning routines and evening routines. And we help people layer in things like meditation, reading an inspirational reading morning and night, things like journaling, gratitude journaling, keeping a 5-year journal. 5-year journal is a really cool thing. It's do you know what that is, Marissa? It's so just like a daily reader, it has a page for each day of the year, 366 pages, right? So a page for January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd, new page. And each of those pages is has got 5 sections in it. So at the top would be the first year, and you'd have maybe 6 or 7 or 8 lines to write. And then there'd be a thicker line. And then there'd be another section for the next year, the second year. And there's 5 of those sections on one page. So you start, whatever year it is, doesn't matter. You just start at the top and you write in the year. So 2020, let's say you buy one for January 1st, 2024, right? You fill in the day, you write whatever, what happened, what you're thinking, how you're feeling, you journal for a few lines, but you have to be succinct because you only have a few lines. So you encapsulate the day, you do that every night. And then a year later, you circle back and now you start writing in the second section and you get to read what you wrote on exactly that day a year ago.
Wow.
So you get to experience your life over through these little journal entries. I've been doing it now for 13 years. So I'm on my 3rd journal, the 3rd year of the 3rd journal.
Wow.
So I'm reading what which because of COVID is fascinating.
Yes.
Like what I was going through 2 years ago today blows my mind, the things that I was going through. Right. And my husband and I always have this fun, ritual where I'll be like pop quiz, 2 years ago today. And he'll be like, oh, and he'll think back. And sometimes he'll get it. And other times it won't. I'll surprise him with like, today was the day you had your left shoulder surgery 2 years ago today. And he'll be like, oh, that was 2 years ago today. So it's super fun to keep something like that. So we have all kinds of habits and rituals that we teach people to do, but it's all about self-care because it's just so important, self-care. And people come to Bright Line Eating. We say they come for the vanity, but they stay for the sanity. They stay for the community. They stay to maintain the weight loss as well, because, sustained weight loss is amazing. I used to be obese and now I'm slender. And I've been that way for 20 years. And it's a miracle to me that I'm not struggling with my weight. I weigh myself once a week. It doesn't matter, but it stays right in a beautiful, perfect little band. Every piece of clothing in my closet fits. I don't have a single piece of clothing in my closet that doesn't fit. It's all my size. I can order clothes out of a catalog and know that they're going to fit in a year. It's amazing. Yeah, it's a beautiful path of self-care that we teach people.
And I sense there's a lower likelihood of cross addictions turning into more cross addictions, right? Because the emphasis is on self-care, boundaries, community, self-ritual, right? That's how we can stop the snowball from just, going down the hill. Because
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, we potentially could have stopped it before developing an addiction with food, but since we're here, we'll just do it. But then it doesn't bleed into other areas in your life.
That's right. And Marissa, the way it works in the brain, because my PhD is in brain and cognitive sciences, so I come at all this from a brain science angle. The way it works in the brain is that dopamine is the molecule of addiction. It's the molecule of more, right? You just want more, more, more. But there are other happy chemicals in the brain as well. There's serotonin, there's oxytocin, there's endorphin. Now, dopamine orients toward the future. I want more of this. What can I get that will satisfy me? I need to go get more. It orients towards the next hit, the next hit, the next hit, the next hit, right? And that's where cross addiction comes in. but you can basically, the brain is trying to offset cortisol with all that, the sort of stress response that just life gets lifey and you're trying to cope with it, right? You can do that with dopamine, but you can also do it with a cocktail of serotonin, endorphin, and oxytocin, which when you're doing bright line eating, you get a ton of those. You get a ton of those. So oxytocin is a bonding neuropeptide that gets released when we connect with others, when we feel loved and seen and validated, and all the interactions in the bright line eating support community really foster that. And also serotonin gets released, interestingly, when we feel the esteem of our peers, when we're seen in a group and we're held up as sort of important in that group. And you might think that might be hard, but actually in the bright line eating community, when people get vulnerable or they post something very real, suddenly they get all this love flowing in and their status rises in the group. It's a beautiful paradox, if you will.
Right.
And so when someone's new, when someone's struggling, they reach out for help and they get this flood of serotonin as people see them, acknowledge them, respect them. It's a beautiful thing. And then endorphins, some exercise and some pain or a good laugh, a good cry. We keep our emotions really real in bright line eating. And so you can get a cocktail of chemicals in the brain that can offset that cortisol without turning to dopamine to do it. And this is how you create a sufficient substitute for just getting the next hit and engaging in that cross addiction.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. If people are interested in your books or Bright Line Eating, where can they go?
So they can get all my books on Amazon or anywhere they sell books, including Bright Line Eating, my latest book, On This Bright Day, which is one of those daily meditation readers. We do have an emporium where people could get things like a 5-year journal or a food journal, things like that. You can find the program and just more information in general at brightlineeating.com. That's BRIGHTLINE, brightlineeating.com. And you can find me all over social media or wherever. YouTube is a great place to find me. I put out a free weekly video every week talking about all this stuff. And I would say the first step for people is really to take the quiz, foodfreedomquiz.com, foodfreedomquiz.com, and get a sense of how susceptible your brain is to food addiction and whether something like bright line eating might be a fit for you.
Yes. Okay. I will put links to all of that in the show notes. Again, thank you for being here. And dear listener, thank you for listening. And we will see you next week. Take care. Hey girl, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster, I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at therapywithmarissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please find one.